welcome, and then we'll have Kieron's presentation, a Q&A, and then an opportunity for some networking, which Kitty will talk to you about when we get to that point. Okay, so I'm supposed to tell you about digital futures. I hope you're already well versed with all that is digital futures at Manchester. But it's a large, sprawling piece of infrastructure which cuts across disciplines and areas of interest. It's a kind of nexus of stuff around digital. Some kind of focus on health, but also on computer science and material science as well. There's quite a lot of stuff in there. Something for everyone, I think. Okay, and within that one particular part is our centre, the Centre for Digital Trust and Society, which covers a range of topics, and again, interdisciplinary perspective on digital trust and society in all of its manifestations, both in terms of technical and social elements of that. So, I'll now introduce you to Kieron's talk. So, Kieron and I met 34 years ago. I had to do the maths earlier on. We're both research assistants of Nigel Chabot at Nottingham University. Our paths then diverged as Kieron went off to Southampton and I went off outside of academia and eventually washed up here at Manchester. Completely unaware of the fact that we were both then working in a similar area, privacy, although neither of us had started at that when we were at Nottingham. And Kieron and I eventually met again at a Royal Society event run by our old mentor, Nigel Chabot. And Kieron by that point had developed a very large range of activities in his role at Southampton, working with like Tim Berners-Lee and Wendy Hall. And Kieron is what I will call, and I hate me saying this because I'm about to mangle some of the English language, a polyfilled scholar. And as well as privacy and trust, which are two pretty important areas for us, he also has significant publications, books and articles on web science, and also on political philosophy, where he's probably one of the main voices in the history and philosophy of conservatism, for example. Today he's going to be talking to us about his new book, The Seven Veils of Privacy, a long-awaited book, I should mention. Certainly Kieron has been talking about the deep ideas that he's been having around this topic for a good 10 years. So I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. Thank you, Kieron.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kitty. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and thanks for the welcome. Yeah, this is a new book. We have some flyers on which at the back, a very kind gentleman from Manchester University Press, Rob, has some flyers, and we also have a special discount code where you can get the book cheaper than it otherwise is. But, so do talk to Rob if you're interested. So yeah, so the starting point of the book is the idea that the privacy studies, privacy literature, is in some kind of crisis, crisis mode. The title of the slide there, Concept of Disarray, was a famous description of the idea of privacy by a leading lawyer, scholar in America, Daniel Soloff, who wrote a book called Understanding Privacy in 2008, probably the best book on privacy in this century. And in the book, he begins with a sort of magisterial survey of the literature, and then showing that it's just saying a range of incompatible and inconsistent things. And he lists some of them here. I don't know if this is a readable slide at the back, but he says, thus privacy is a fundamental right. It's essential for freedom, democracy, psychological well-being, individuality and creativity. It's proclaimed inviolable but decried as detrimental, antisocial, even pathological. Some claim that privacy is nearing extinction, others argue that the threat to it is illusory. So this is his sort of summary of what people are saying, loads of opposite things, and then he concludes the bit in bold. It seems as though everybody is talking about privacy, but it's not clear exactly what they're talking about. And this is quite a common view of the privacy literature, and it's not surprising because if you think of the disciplines of people who are interested in privacy, we've got here law, computing and cybersecurity, psychology, sociology, and so on and so on and so on. Everyone on that list has something important to say about privacy. It's not, it's clearly a very important topic. Many diverse stakeholders. This isn't just an academic side issue. We've got policymakers, we've got media, law enforcement, tech giants, not to mention ordinary citizens who have their own quite reasonable privacy concerns. And we're looking at an age of digital modernity with social change and technological change that's accelerating and getting more and more confusing and privacy threatening. So that's the sort of case for saying that the privacy world, the privacy literature is in a state of crisis. And what I want to argue, or what I argue in my book, is that that claim is overblown. It's not in crisis. It may well be that there are a lot of different points of view and different perspectives, but actually the crisis is self-generated. It's not something inherent in the field. So what I did in the book, I did my own magisterial survey, probably to say less magisterial than Sorrow's, but I did my best. And I went back to the private. This is the first actual great paper on privacy from 1890 by Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis from the Harvard Law Review called The Right to Privacy. It's an excellent paper. It's worth reading now, not just for antique reasons. It's an excellent paper. What's interesting in it is they talk all about the rights of privacy that they've detected in American common law, but at no stage do they define privacy. And if they were just supremely confident that anyone reading their paper would know what privacy meant. They didn't bother what they were talking about. And this is actually standard practice right through the century up until the 1960s. Nobody defines privacy. The reader is complicit with the author, but we all know what it means. So here's another example. The caption competition here, she's saying, Brian, someone's just put this through the letterbox. That's actually Eleanor Roosevelt, the widow of Franklin D. And Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, doesn't tell us what privacy is, it just gives us a privacy right. I think it's Article 12. It says no one should be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy. Gendered pronoun used in the neuter sense, as was standard in the 1940s. There are some hints that privacy has things to do with family-owned correspondence, honour and reputation, but it doesn't tell you what privacy is. And this, again, absolutely standard. The European Convention on Human Rights says something pretty similar to that and doesn't tell you what privacy is. So if there was going to be a definition of this, it's going to emerge gradually from case law. But then it's all changed in the 1960s. This is my own bookshelf. And in 1967, there was a book called, in fact it's here, Privacy and Freedom by Alan Weston. And he, which is also a brilliant book, extremely well written. And he defined privacy, he defined it in terms of control of information. Since then, everyone's defined privacy. I've gone through all this literature. This book here with the yellow streak up its spine, that's Mark Elliott's book, so I really went through the pain barrier there to write this. And there's a proliferation of definitions, and as a result, people make judgments like these. So Julie Cohn, privacy has an image problem. Daniel Solov, nobody can articulate what it means. Raymond Watt, too vague and unwieldy a concept to perform useful analytical work. Julie Innes resembles exploring an unknown swamp. And a conceptual morass from Helen Listenau. The first three are lawyers, the last two are philosophers. So that's the sort of privacy crisis. And indeed, all these books say very different things about privacy. So there's the crisis sort of set out in paper. And in my review, I sort of boiled the discussions and arguments down to a few. So these are the main ones I discuss in the book. So these are various topics. These aren't sort of either or. You don't have to be one or other of these, but these are, I've chosen the two most sort of likely positions. And what's the model of privacy? Well, some people say privacy is control over information or control over personal space or whatever. Others say it's withdrawn. How does it operate? Some say, well, it's active, it's empowering. If you've got privacy, you can do things you couldn't do before. Others have a more passive view that privacy is being let alone. People don't bother you on that model. Who are the beneficiaries of privacy? Some people say it's individuals, some people say groups can be private too. What form does it have? Some people focus very much, a lot of people focus on restricting the information flow, others talk about the wider set of forms, including control of space or the space we're in or whatever. Ethically, some people argue it's a normative good, others say, well, it's, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, it's got costs, it's got benefits. Ontologically, some people want to derive it from other concepts such as freedom, and others say it's a first order phenomenon. Some people say it's a human right. Against that, some will say it's an often strong preference, but not a right. Some say it's valuable for the goods it provides, for example, human dignity or autonomy, or it facilitates democracy. Others say it's intrinsically valuable. In terms of meaning, now back to the original slide, some say it's vague, and some an extreme view is it's even an incoherent concept, versus the people who say it's clear and meaningful. And then where does it come from? Well, particularly those who think it's vague and incoherent say that, well, what we need to do, we need to redefine it with a technical, legal construction, versus people who say ordinary language is fine. So we have all those oppositions. All going on in the literature at the same time, and more. I mean, these are just the ones I kind of discussed, but there are, I'm sure, many more. So then the question is, well, why have academic definitions become more complex? Partly it's just a standard thing. Once someone has defined privacy, the argument against it is just to redefine it yourself and then have an argument. But it's actually privacy, I think, in the second half of the century has just become more politicized. Right? You've got the growth of the state, the Cold War security state, the welfare state, both intruding into our private lives. You've got the idea that the personal is political, the number of ideological positions, such as, for example, feminism or environmentalism, that say that what have been portrayed as private actions before now have a public aspect that needs to be exposed. Most importantly, I think, has been the obvious thing, the spread of data processing, which that's why the timing is the 60s. That's the year when the decade when the databases really started being used. And now, of course, we live in a data-driven society. So the interest in privacy is not surprising given that background. And the definitions that people come up with influence the way they are. So suppose you were arguing against Facebook. It helps you to say that privacy is control of the flow of information, because that is what Facebook will let you do, control the information flow about you. So it's quite easy, given that definition of privacy, to say that Facebook breaches privacy. So it's a helpful definition to have if you're attacking Facebook. On the other hand, if you work for Facebook, if you're a scientist working for Facebook, she may reply, actually privacy isn't anything to do with controlling the flow of information. It's about having a certain set of rights which we can trade off against other goods that you might think are superior. Because that means you can then give your privacy away to see all your personal data hemorrhaging in the general direction of Mark Zuckerberg, and because you get something better from Facebook. So what's happening is, you say one thing about privacy, it has one definition, you attack Facebook. The scientist at Facebook says something, privacy is something else, and pushes back. And the two positions, rather than having a substantive conversation or substantive argument, we basically get the two positions talking past each other. So semantics is supposed to be doing the work of arguments. The definition of privacy is kind of preloaded in order to tilt the argument in your favour. And this is something that many commentators, I say academics, in fact, commentators of any kind, have this tendency to produce a definition of privacy that will swing the debate. So The result is what I call kitchen sink definitions. That's a very bad name, because what I mean is everything is in these definitions apart from the kitchen sink. But privacy definitions are becoming theory-laden. They're overburdened with all sorts of clauses. The value of privacy is just baked into the definition itself, and they're designed to influence debate. But of course, by influencing debate, and tilting it in your direction, you prevent consensus happening. I can't tell you how long it took me to scrub the kitchen so that I could photograph it. But my claim is actually that privacy is relatively simple. It's a word of English, and competent English speakers use it fairly straightforwardly. It's not a problem for people to use. You can look it up in the dictionary. So it may well be that if we can discuss what privacy is, the state of privacy, or what a breach of privacy looks like, independently of our claims to it, or the rights associated with it, the preferences about it, the control we have over it, its value, it may be that we could actually make more sense. It's not going to resolve the arguments, but at least it will mean everyone is fighting on the same battlefield. So if you go back to the oppositions, so as I said, I found all of these positions in the survey. It's fair to say I think the middle column are probably majority positions in the literature on all these topics. And it's probably fair to say that most serious commentators hold most of those positions. They are independent of each other. You don't have to hold them all. But I think most serious commentators do hold most of these. The ones on the right are rather more minority positions. Someone who held all those positions in the right-hand column would be an outlier, if not a certifiable not case. So I hold all of those positions in the right-hand column, and they're all argued for in common. But most importantly, the book talks particularly about the meaning and derivation of privacy. I think the meaning of privacy is clear, and I think we don't need any resources beyond ordinary language to talk about it, is my view. And that's the burden of the book. What do I take to be the ordinary language meaning? Well, I'm not going to define privacy, because I don't think privacy is the sort of thing you can define particularly well, and there are reasons for that based in sort of Wittgensteinian philosophy that I'm not going into today. But the resources of ordinary English are actually quite interesting. I set this up at the beginning of the book. It's called the reference list, and this, I claim, more or less covers an intuitive, native speaker, competent native speaker view of what privacy means in English, or the things it will cover. And I've given them labels with $10 words, but actually I think this will do as an explication of ordinary English use of the word. So what we have, in case it's difficult to read, is we have informational privacy. That means some kind of information about you is not known. Decisional privacy, you're able to do what you want to do without other people interfering. Private property is reasonably straightforward. I don't mean that in the legal sense, I also mean it in the sense that this is my flyer, even though I haven't actually got an ownership certificate for it. Psychological privacy is the idea that the motives behind or the thoughts behind what I'm doing are not revealed to others. Ideological privacy means my political and religious belief system isn't being used against me. Spatial privacy is about territory and access to the body or the territory. Attentional privacy is not being the object of scrutiny. And extrinsic privacy, that's kind of no one's kind of intruding into my world, so it's, a breach of extrinsic privacy is you're sitting on a bus and there's a guy having a very loud mobile phone conversation sitting next to you. That's a breach of your privacy. And these are linked merely by common and agreed uses of privacy vocabulary. And I use this as a sort of a heuristic device. I think it more or less covers ordinary English use. I have been asked several times what my methodology was for drawing this up. I used actually quite a well-known but now unfashionable methodology, which was I made it up in my head. And I think I can do that because I'm a competent native English speaker. It's completely straightforward. That means you can do it too, and you've probably got with a slightly different set of things, but it would probably more or less cover the same space. You might have a different hierarchy. I seem to remember Mark had a couple of things that I didn't have, but I can factor them out in terms of these. And, you know, so we can all do this. This isn't meant to be any kind of definition. This is just meant to be a heuristic device to remind us what we talk about when we're talking about privacy. And this isn't chaos, right? It's not tidy. I don't say it's tidy, but it's tractable. And we know it's tractable because people use it all the time. So that led me to, so the main structure of the book is a framework for looking at privacy. It's intended to separate out different privacy discourses, some of which are about definitions, but some of which are about other things. And I think it's a useful tool, I think, for understanding privacy situations and what the privacy issues are in any particular environment. In particular, unpicking confusion and unpacking the assumptions in the kitchen sink definitions I discussed earlier. I also think it's useful for facilitating cross-cultural comparisons, which I won't talk about today, but there's a chapter in the book about that. And it's based on a pretty thorough survey of the literature between 1890 and 2020. It's also, I think, of use as a sort of a student text, because it's a pretty comprehensive review and presentation of privacy theories, but it's not a definition of privacy. So the 7 levels of privacy, the 7 rails of the title, these are the discourses we have. And the first one is the level of the conceptions of privacy. This is your definition level. These are the philosophical definitional discussions we have. So what happens here is you have, basically, if we have new practices or new technologies, they will subtend or create new privacy issues that strike us. We're drawn to the privacy we can do. They can be multiple, so something like the growth of social media has led to a number of privacy conceptions that we need to deal with. A conception of privacy is likely to evolve in discourse about a problem that it needn't do. And our perceptions of it will, of course, vary across all sorts of social ranges. So here is an example. This is a still from a 1960s British historical epic called Carry On Cleo. And the chap on the left has just invented the window. He's a caveman, he's invented the window. And he's explaining it. And it's great, it's a really good idea. It lets in the light, it lets out the smoke, it's fantastic. And the chap on the right, you can see, is struggling with the idea because he's noticed that a new privacy conception has been born. That actually now you can be visible in the cave, whereas before you couldn't be. So, in the same way as the Warren Brandner's paper I mentioned earlier in 1890 was driven by the development of photographs, of cameras that could take snapshot photographs, and they found their way into the mass media, which led to a privacy concern that we didn't have before. Similarly, all our digital technologies ranging from databases to smartphones to social media raise new privacy concerns that are similar enough to older privacy concerns that we're drawn to the same environment. So new conceptions emerge, we're drawn to that privacy vocabulary, we use analogies, we use metaphor, we have perceived breaches and intrusions, we adapt older descriptions. And the vocabulary we're talking about are very, very important markers of a privacy concern is the use of first-person possessive adjectives. If we're drawn to describe things using my or I, that's actually a good indicator that there's probably a privacy issue lurking somewhere in the background. classic English phrase meaning I have a privacy interest here, keep out, is that's my business, or that's our business. And all of these things are, you may not be able to read this, but my body, my personal space, my information, our property, my image, my family, my thoughts, our intimate secret, my friends, my history, my income, our ambitions, my shame, our meeting, my bodily functions, the skeleton in my closet, all of those subtend some sort of privacy interest or kind. But when we describe those, claim, there's no immediate sense of whether privacy is going to be appropriate. I think I have another list here. Whether privacy is going to be appropriate, valuable, desired, desirable, legal, enforceable, functional, antisocial, vital for democracy, essential for psychological well-being, good, bad, or indifferent. Right? All those value terms don't need to be put into the conception. They appear at different levels. I'll just go through the slide very quickly, but the most privacy discussions arise as part of a problem or a dispute, but they don't have to. And we can develop a privacy conception purely from a thought experiment. So Robinson Crusoe, the famous novel, which has a man alone on a desert island for 20 odd years, has been discussed a lot in privacy terms. Does Robinson have privacy or not? Telepathy is a still from a film called Village of the Damned from the 1960s. These are telepathic children, and there are huge the point of the film is there are huge privacy problems because it's very hard to combat their evil schemes because they know what everyone's going to be doing in advance. There's also some interesting work on multiple personalities. Nobody's really put forward, there's no literature on multiple personalities and privacy, so the question of whether one personality is private with respect to another personality. No one's thought to write any privacy papers on that. They could do, but nobody had. But there are interesting discussions that are on the fringe of the privacy world. So, for example, can one personality consent to therapy given to another personality? It's an interesting question. I have no idea what the answer to that is, but it's an interesting question. But no one has thought to associate that with the privacy literature. But they could. It would be a perfectly reasonable conception of privacy. So the second level is architecture and affordances. So that's it. That means the environments we are within. Given you've got a conception of privacy in the environment we're in, what kind of privacy affordances does that environment have? That environment could be the built environment. It could be our clothes, it could be a virtual environment, digital environment. So here in this room, we have a window, but nobody can really see. We have doors closed, but people can get in. A big window behind. And all this kind of affects what we can do because we're having a private meeting. So we can have those kinds of discussions. What privacy do we actually have, or what privacy does the environment give us? At a third level, we have phenomenology. What does privacy feel like? Not very much on it in the literature, but it's an important question. So, for example, if you think about surveillance, the effectiveness of surveillance depends on the phenomenology, whether you know or whether you are aware that you are under surveillance. So, if you're not aware of the cameras pointing at you or the snoopers looking at you, then you might well incriminate yourself. But if you are aware, then you will probably self-censor and there'll be a chilling effect. So the way surveillance works will depend on how you relate to the surveillance devices and whether you actually see them or feel them. Level 4 is kind of the cognitive psychology level, and that comes out mainly in terms of the preferences we have about privacy. Do I want, or choice or utility, do I want to be private? Do I want to be public? Do I want to be visible to my network? And our preferences for privacy will, of course, also mix in with our preferences for non-privacy things. So, I may not mind not being private to Facebook because I get really interesting services back from them. And I'm going up one more. We get to a societal level and social norms. And again, our privacy norms, which are things like you shouldn't eavesdrop on conversations, you shouldn't stare at people on the bus. It's those kind of social norms which kind of make privacy actionable in the social world. Those social norms also exist alongside non-privacy norms to create normal systems that we use to negotiate the world. Level 6 is reasonably straightforward, law and regulations. There's a lot of law about privacy. I also include in this any kind of rules made by legitimate rule-makers. So the University of Manchester will have rules about how much a tutor may know about a student's medical history, for example. And that would kind of come under here. That would be the sort of thing we discuss at this level. And then at the highest level, we have the morals, the rights, politics. When is privacy right? When is it right to give people privacy, to make sure they have privacy? When is it right that privacy should be taken away from them? So, I mean, that's a sort of a little map of the whole thing. And each one of these is a different layer of discourse. And they all connect. And so, for example, it may well be that someone feels bad, a breach of privacy feels bad, which is a phenomenological level 3 thing, and it feels bad because it's gone against the social norm, which is level 5. So the levels certainly interact. They're not independent, but they don't get separated out as much as they should. And as you see, they go from kind of conceptual things through to individual psychology, through to social stuff. They also get more normative as you go up the hierarchy. I have numbered them and put them in a linear order because I think that the connections between adjacent levels are stronger than connections to the levels further apart. But the connections are only vaguely conceptual, they're not logical, it's not supervenient or anything like that. So those are the sort of discourses that go on, and the book claims that they should be kept apart. So what does that buy you if you do that, apart from greater awareness of your own? Well, there's two things really that I will discuss. There's a few things, but I will discuss two in particular. And one is, it helps when we're talking about those kitchen sink definitions that are cram too much stuff in from different discourses. It helps highlight within a definition where things are being mixed up illegitimately and where people are talking past each other. So I just have some examples of this, which is most of the rest of my talk. So here's the first one. There's a claim that privacy is only for the individual. It's something that it's an individual right or whatever it might happen to be. And I think this is just a bias, sort of Western-centric bias leading from our human rights and legalistic discourses, which are actually sort of level 6 and 7. Where we're talking about whether privacy attaches to an individual or a group or whatever, that's level 1 stuff, that's conceptual stuff. And the most difficult thing is that it ignores the claims of groups, and I wouldn't mind betting, I don't know how to prove this, I'm firmly convinced of this, but I have no idea how I would go about proving it, but I reckon that most real-world claims for privacy have much more to do with claims for privacy for groups, typically a family, or a household, or intimate couples, or intimate partners, intimate groups. But there's also sort of conspiracies. Some people have tried to include algorithmically cluster groups in machine learning clustering, but I rule that out because we all may have an individual interest, a privacy interest in not being included in a particular algorithmic cluster, but the algorithmic cluster itself doesn't have its own interest. Again, the legalistic bias says that privacy is only for the living individual. In fact, the dead have privacy issues too. Famous people concerned about their posthumous privacy. Writers burn their letters. Somerset Maugham or Charles Dickens burnt their letters. In ancient Egypt, just to show that I'm not being Western-centric, in ancient Egypt they had a view of the personality as being made of certain components. The body and the name and the bar, the car, and all sorts of things. And some of those clearly have privacy elements to them, such as the secret name that no one else should know. What they believed was that when you died, all these components of personality would just go their separate ways, and then you would have, in the afterlife, a privacy problem of keeping the things that should be secret. I also mentioned indigenous peoples. The big debate in the museum world about whether it is proper to display the bodies or the property of dead people from different cultures to our own. That seems to me to be very strongly privacy influenced, because we even have that debate about cultures that have no representatives now. And then we can even talk about animals having privacy. It's quite easy to do that. We fall into the vocabulary very easily. So cats hate to excrete if someone's watching them. They much prefer to do it behind the wardrobe where you won't find it for weeks. I don't say that cats should have Article 8 privacy rights, but it's very easy to talk about them in privacy terms. And if we think about, go back to the reference list of the ordinary language thing, we can see why it's not just individuals that have privacy issues. If we think about what type of thing could have these types of privacy, sometimes as a psychological privacy, or ideological or extrinsic privacy, the thing that has psychological privacy is a thinking subject with a first-person perspective. Well, that's an individual. But not always. Informational privacy could apply to any reference of an identifier. For decisional privacy, you need to be an agent. For private property, you need to be an agent or a legal person. For spatial privacy, you need to be embodied. And for attentional privacy, you need to be an object of perception. Now, none of those are essentially individuals. You could have corporate things, you could have groups, families, etc., meeting those requirements. So here's another example. Here's a level 2 issue, and this is privacy and security. So I'm talking here about differential privacy as an example, which is a very, very useful tool with a lot of privacy affordances. The cybersecurity tool makes it a level 2 thing. But it's been claimed by its advocates to be a standardizing metric for privacy, something that will tell you what privacy is, i.e. a more conceptual thing than it is. So quite apart from, but that doesn't work, and we can think about it when we think about the conception that it focuses on. First of all, it's only information privacy, but also it's a very specific type of information privacy based on database querying, random noise, epsilon parameters, all that stuff that I barely understand. Mark, you're the leading expert. And also this virtual architecture has got to fit into a social context. It's not just the cybersecurity, the cryptos that do it for you. You need users, you need database curators, you need managers, you need access controls and incentives. There are all sorts of power asymmetries, and it may well be that instead of decrypting information, you can simply bribe the curator with $1,000 to give you the data. So that tells you that actually the differential privacy is a level 2 architectural thing, not a definition. A very common definition is privacy is control. But again, when we think about so privacy is control of the information about you, privacy is control of the space around you. And if we think about the various levels, we can see that control is actually just a means of getting on preferences. If I control the space, I can make it according to my preferences, which makes it level 4, not level 1. It's not a definition of privacy. If we decide that privacy is control, we just have 2 words meaning control. This person here, Jennifer Ringley, ran a webcam. She set up a webcam in her bedroom for 7 years, at the turn of the century, and she had total control and zero privacy because she broadcasts her entire life. It seems clear that's just contradictory to suggest that she had privacy when she had control. She had privacy when the internet broke down, she had no control. There's a similar one, it's about consent. Privacy breaches as unconsented. But of course, what do you consent to? You consent to a privacy breach. A privacy breach doesn't go away just because you consented to it. In the same way as if I consent to a surgical procedure, I still have the surgical procedure. Consensual sex is still sex. And a consensual privacy breach is still a privacy breach. It's just not one that you care about because you consented to it. And this is kind of a version of, there's a sort of a line of what I call voluntarism, where there is a conceptual mistake being made. You start off with a truism that a breach of privacy only matters to me if it matters to me. Well, that's true. That's a tautology. That's obviously true. But it doesn't follow from that to be a breach of privacy, it has to matter to me. That doesn't follow. If you think about it, the criticisms that matter to me are the criticisms that matter to me. But to be a criticism of me, it doesn't have to be something that matters to me. So there's this idea that privacy is only appropriate when someone welcomes it or consents to it, and a privacy breach always has to be unconsented. Is again mixing up level 4 stuff about getting our preferences with the consensual. I'll skip that because we're kind of running slightly short. But here's another one, privacy is law. Lawyers get very hegemonic about things like this, and will often just look at GDPR to find out what privacy is. And again, what law does is it tells you what rights, it tells you what the state will protect. It doesn't tell you what privacy is. Privacy is regulated by law, it's not defined by it. And you can see this simply because, so the example I use in the book is upskirting. The practice of taking a photograph of a woman's skirt with or without her consent. And a man did this in Oregon in 2015 and was quite properly brought up in court. He was 61, she was 13. And his defence was very simple. His defence was, this is perfectly legal, I have done nothing illegal. And after a lot of soul searching, it turned out that it was actually correct. He was right. It wasn't illegal. It would have been illegal if he'd lifted up the skirt, but it was not. He hadn't done that, and so it was perfectly legal. There was, of course, an outcry. The law was changed quite properly. So in 2016, upskirting became illegal in Oregon. Now, it would seem to be a heroic thing to say that upskirting was a breach of privacy in 2016, but not in 2015. It's just a breach of privacy, full stop. Whether or not it's legal, it seems to be quite clear. Similar things about jurisdictions and the way the law varies across those. Incorrect persuasion, again, data protection is a level 6 thing, it's a law thing, it's not type of privacy, but a lot of people are keen to say that privacy is data protection. I think so. I always think sort of so data protection stands to privacy like salad cream stands to mayonnaise. It's just it's okay, but it's not a brilliant substitute. Data protection is defined by law. Privacy is not. Privacy is regulated by law. Data protection is defined by. Data protection actually focuses on informational privacy, but most important, it's meant to be a balance between the privacy interests of the data subject and the interests in getting value from the data of the data controller. So the privacy interests of the data subject are the input to data protection thinking, not defined by. So again, so data protection is a legal thing, but perfectly reasonable. It's an interesting kind of. So I'm not criticising data protection, but it doesn't define privacy. So one more use of the, so I was sort of using the framework to think about definitions that are bringing too much stuff together. Here's another one. This is mapping new domains. The levels kind of gives a structure for thinking about a particular thing. So I've got a chapter in the book, the final chapter, about how our privacy, how the world of privacy has changed since the COVID pandemic. And if we go, the levels enable you to kind of unpick this and ask one specific question. So were there any new conceptions of privacy developed as a result of the pandemic measures? Probably not, although the lockdown was kind of a new type of thing we all had to cope with, where you got more spatial privacy and less decisional privacy. There were certainly new affordances and new architectures. We got the contact tracing apps and technology. We had privacy-preserving machine learning. We had came on at a pace as we had to analyse a lot of medical data. Also, COVID masks turned out to be privacy protective, even though that wasn't their main purpose. How did it feel? Well, in fact, what we've seen, psychologists have described perceptions of personal space are evolving. People apparently feel they need greater space around them when with other people. We had a lot of loneliness at the time, and people feeling safer outside and at a distance from people. And that last result was even true even in virtual reality spaces where there's no chance of catching COVID at all. What about preferences? Well, we had huge sort of political arguments about whether we should wear face masks, whether we should have surveillance as part of our contact tracing, what you were allowed to do, whether you should use cash, whether you should work from home. Tons of stuff at the cognitive psychological level. And ditto at the norms level, although the norms, of course, changed more slowly. But norms certainly did affect policy, with sort of European versus East Asian strategies for keeping outbreaks down. What about regulation? Well, we had lockdown rules, we had apps became semi-compulsory to carry, we had data protection, location data being a big issue about how we dealt with contact tracing. We had compulsion in vaccinations, we wanted to carry vaccine certificates with us. So there were a lot of regulation to get to the bottom of. And then at the value top, then obviously there's the personal freedom to do what you want, to not be vaccinated if you were an anti-vax person, versus the interests of the community, which was generally thought would be helped by vaccination. There was the issues of private sector solutions like the Google, Apple API in smartphones for contact tracing apps being forced upon governments, and governments did not like that. And it may well be that the ethics of data-driven medical research have moved on apace as a result of the needs to get results out very quickly from epidemiologists or those studying the virus itself. So that's that. So this is my concluding slide. What's the value of the book? Well, I think it's sort of the value of the book is the conceptual hygiene that it produces. I think it's a useful framework, I believe, for highlighting different discourses and looking at the relationship between them. It is grounded in a thorough survey of the literature, and I try and expand that. So it's sort of an analytic tool in that it helps to map privacy issues, unpick over elaborate definitions, and also focus one's own debates. So one is aware of when one is, for example, talking about preferences and when one is talking about norms. But I also think it's a decent pedagogic tool because it introduces the privacy literature in a principal way. So that's that. My final slide says, please don't sue me if you made any of those films I got stills out of. And with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieron. So, opening up the floor to questions. Does anybody have anything they would like to ask?
So, on the concept of spatial privacy,
Yeah.
you started with saying that one is about active and empowering as against passive and being let alone. But being let alone can also be empowering.
Yep, I agree.
So that there is a dichotomy there.
Yeah, they're not total opposites. The question is really why is privacy valuable? Is it what it enables you to do, or is it, I know what scale is that happening? So the empowering view says that you are better able to pursue the projects of your life if you're in private, or if you have privacy, because you can present yourself in a certain way that other people can't influence, and so on and so forth. So it focuses, that view focuses very much on the outer aspects and how I present myself to the world as someone making decisions and doing things in it. So that's the active view. The passive view says, you're quite right to make the point that actually it doesn't say anything fundamentally different. But the emphasis is on, let me just take a step back and do what I want within my own kind of sphere. I don't necessarily see myself as an active participant in the world, let's say in the public zone of the public sphere. It's I want to protect the private sphere from intrusion. So they have different emphases. And when you're if you think about data protection, that is a tool to help you be an active pursuer of things in the world, right? Because the intrusion into your personal life is relatively small. On the other hand, if you are able to construct, if I am able to construct your view of me, right, I can interact with you on far better terms than if I couldn't do that. The alternative is, the being left alone view is, you have no right to know anything about me, just keep away. So it's nuanced. I certainly didn't want to give the idea that these were two absolute opposite views. So you're quite right to point that out.
The first part, the active being empowering, is actually how you interpret it. It depends on that, because active can not be empowering as well. If I can draw a parallel, then it's a case of dual use concept which we study during our export control process. Suppose if the information is available to somebody, when he is active, then that information can be used for public good or can be used for causing harm. So it's a dual use case. So that is why in the first case of active empowering can be active causing harm as well. It's not empowering.
My privacy being empowering. Am I doing the harm? Or is someone doing the harm to me?
Someone.
Right. That's true. That is true. But then that would be a view shared by the being let alone. The passive people also would think, I do not want this information about me to get out because it could cause me harm. There is a very strong view, particularly in the economics of privacy. Richard Posner is very big on it, which is that privacy is empowering and it's always bad because it creates an information asymmetry. Right? So if we're having a sort of job interview, you're interviewing me for a job, I will want to conceal certain things, whatever it might happen to be, right? About myself, my criminal record, or whatever it is. And according to Poznan, this will make the market for, in this case, employment, function less efficiently, because you are prevented from knowing something that's actually quite relevant, which is that I have a criminal record, and you may well not employ me if you need to. So he sees my privacy as empowering me and you being a victim, because it creates an information asymmetry that works to my favour. And so Poznan was all in favour of publishing everything about everybody on economic grounds. So you're right, there's a whole, but again, what we're getting at here is a whole set of issues that spread across different kind of discourses that it really helps to know that we're talking about, in this case, preferences and my ability to work in the world versus my ability to keep the world out of my life. So thank you very much for the point about that.
Yeah, I can see the real value in often trying to understand the privacy impacts of new technologies or practices. And I can see the real value in breaking that down into these different kind of layers. I wondered, have you thought about how this approach might generalise to other ideas? And I guess the one that pops into my head was property, perhaps, a bit in the sense that property, or just there's a lot of other things that we have, we talk past each other on. And this kind of this approach, this sort of layered approach, what's the conception, what are the affordances, etc. It would seem to, it might generalise.
I think it will, and I think you're absolutely right. Mark and I have discussed identity in this area, and I think we got a kind of, so it may well be a slightly different set of discourses given a different topic. I am doing a book on trust at the moment, and trust, in fact, at some point I might pitch to role for Manchester University Press or something. And again, I think trust is one of those areas where, yes, it does function at almost all those levels, if not all of them. So yes, this is a generalisable thing. The reason, it emerged out of my work in privacy, hence the tight interaction with privacy stuff. And it may well need a tweak or a generalisation or a bit of abstraction to make it reach across all the divides. But I have those because I do think it's an issue that is critical.
Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to have your views on privacy and security. Can there ever be a balance between the two, or one will always triumph over the other? You give the example where you withhold your criminal information, and maybe you're given that job, and at the end of the day, something happens because of that criminal history. So yes, you have your right to privacy, but you're putting other people's security at risk. So I'd like to have your view on that. Can there ever be a balance between the two, or one will always prevail over the other?
Well, absolutely. I can agree more. The problem with so I think this is very much an issue that we discussed at the very top levels. It's about what's a social good and what's going to really be good for society. One problem with certainly with one framing of the issue is that it's often said that privacy is good for you personally, whereas security is a collective good. And so you will always be outnumbered. But even though each one of us has our own privacy concerns, we're only one person, and the security of the whole is important, which makes privacy a very hard sell, particularly, for example, if there's a terrorist threat or some perceived crime wave or something like that. So, and again, I do talk about this in the book with respect to a philosophy called communitarianism, which says that the community is the most important thing, since we all, without a community, we have nothing. So the community is essential. So there's a philosopher called who was written on this, specifically has criticised privacy, not as necessarily a bad thing, but as something that needs to be overridden. And he talks about a number of areas, for example, releasing the addresses of known sex offenders when they live in the community, things like that. He has some interesting, some very strong arguments. I'm generally a pro-privacy person. And I think probably most people working in the literature are for rather than against privacy. So the literature is quite balanced against security and for privacy. In the policy-making world, it's probably the other way around. So Charles Raab used to have arguments that privacy and security actually pushed in the same direction. You were more secure if you had privacy. I can't remember what the detail of those were, but there are some people who try and sort of unpick that, the opposition that you rightly drew attention to say that actually if, and this is the point you made, if we're not private, the information that is public about us could be used against us. So our security depends on our privacy, and sort of collectively we just need to manage that in such a way that the police can do their job, but villains can't. And it's hugely complicated by American tech giants and huge amounts of data about us, and by social media. We put so many more things on social media. So it's a tricky dance that just gets, or in an arms race, just gets more difficult over time as more and more information about us is created. The short answer is it'll be a dialectic. It will go one way or the other.
Yeah, thanks, Kieron. I had a question about the interaction between normative conceptions of privacy and empirical conceptions of privacy. In that many of the examples you gave are quite context-specific and potentially could be experienced differently by people at a subjective level. The example of the bus you gave, one person's breach of extrinsic privacy might not be an issue for somebody else in terms of privacy breach. Yeah. So how do you account for that variation at the level of subjective individuals when developing these more general and universal levels for understanding that normative side of privacy?
Well, I would say the difficult problem. So privacy is fundamentally right. So our experience of privacy is our sort of phenomenological level, and that will be sort of fundamentally different for everybody. Our preferences are highly subjective. So we're now in sort of level 4 cognitive psychology area. And then how does that map onto social norms? Well, this is just always difficult, and always will be, because we react to norms differently. And the interesting thing about norms is you can explain someone's preferences or someone's action in terms of norms, even if the actions are completely opposite. You can explain them with reference to the same norm. To give you an example, I'm standing here fully dressed. Why am I doing that? Because the social norm is that one exposes face and hands, but nothing else. I follow that. Now, if a streaker came, no doubt, lighten things up, but also, how would we explain his behaviour? Well, we would say, actually, there's a social norm against that we always ought to be in public in our clothes and all this stuff. And he's interested in breaking that. I'm interested in keeping it, he's interested in breaking it. So there's the sort of, and so the difficulty is, what do you then do about the norm when you start to write your rules and laws at level 6? And that's just very difficult, because how do you craft a rule that covers that range of experience? Add to that another layer of complexity. Some types of law are designed to bolster social norms, and some laws are designed to undermine them. And when is it the right thing to do that? Well, of course, that's then a moral discussion about how the law should be steering society. So, within the home, like private sphere stuff, within the home there are a lot of gendered norms about the division of labour. Broadly speaking, the thrust of law over the past 30, 40 years has been to undermine those laws, not to strengthen them. And for perfectly good reasons, not criticism, which is a statement of fact. Yes, so I think what I'm saying is it's terribly complicated. But there's no sort of way of doing it, but it actually is really helpful to think, well, okay, how, level 2, what can we export to the environment that will protect privacy or expose it? Level 3, how are people confronting it? How are they experiencing it? Level 4, what preferences they want? What do they want? What should they want? Or what do people generally want? What do we do around here? How do we regulate that? And what's right or wrong? Separating out those questions. So this framework solves none of the problems that you raised. And it's not intended to. But it's kind of intended to make us think about the range of things on offer here, and perhaps even why it's so difficult.
What's your view on the kind of the rise of sort of generative AI and things like content control around privacy? I feel sort of probably compiled data sets, in terms of the language model scope. Yeah. Obviously, it's very topical views.
Very topical, it's an example of new conceptions emerging of that we may really thought of that much before the new technology. So it's a nice example of that. But my view is we're still wrestling with it. It's not obvious how it's going to play out. A lot of it, I think, will devolve to the outputs of Gen AI and what it actually, there are lots of worries about what it's going to do, but we don't know whether those worries are actually
Obviously, it's got sort of impact on life with things like content curators, a bit traditionally human-based endeavour in the future. But earlier bound things like watermarking and sort of site authenticity.
The questions about whether the AI would go enough to faith and watermarks and all the rest of it. How we deal with that. I suspect ultimately we'll be down to a trade of positives versus negatives in terms of outcomes. But I don't know.
One question is where does the sort of kind of information sets like this giant public database of knowledge that is basically farmed? Use why or is it eventually will be?
Well, this is kind of an interesting kind of question generally about conceptions of privacy based on data processing, because in a sense they don't have to be that salient. So, I mean, you will remember a few years ago there was a deep mind that was installed because it had been processing medical data to key users without consent of the database. So that is interesting because it's actually a very, very abstract conception of privacy that something's been processed to train a machine learning system that doesn't actually affect in any material ways the people whose privacy has been breached. The phenomenological level is 0. Preferences are indicated by the consent, technically, but it proves impossible for very large databases to get consent. So the abstraction of the conception, it seems to me, makes the asking of these questions rather hard, because fundamentally, deep down, no one really cares apart from people like ourselves, whose job it is. And that's part, I think, of a bit. I mean, so one thing that got me writing this book was there's a bit of a disconnect between academic literature in all fields. Not talking simply about information science or cybersecurity or law, but there is a bit of a disconnect between ideas about privacy or late discussions about privacy and the things that we discuss about the technicalities of GDPR or whatever. And you can see why that happens because, of course, these are very technical issues and we do have to get into the nitty-gritty. So I don't have a great answer to your question. I only to say this will become a very technical problem and I don't think there will be very much public interest in it. I would suspect that that's my guess.
So one more question from the middle.
Certainly. I suppose I take you mean about the levels and the variations within each level, because everyone will set their own, their own stance.
Yeah.
But there are things that are coming through policy and into communities around volunteering. To your question, the issue between privacy and security, the compliance or the what I'm looking for, protection of vulnerable within our society, and those things are coming. The question about when public data actually comes back into private ownership, should we all have private ownership of any comments that we make out in the public arena? At what point do we start to discuss that on a more public level? Because charities, organisations who employ people, they need to understand where there's land within their own environment.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And so one of the things I discuss in the book is a lot of the. So the original paper, the 1890 paper by the Wine and Brandon Society, was a middle class problem in that a very wealthy family had a wedding and the yellow press had come and take photographs of it in their report. This is not a problem that most people have. And there is a sort of a kind of middle class debate that goes on about privacy. It's sort of haute bourgeois, call it haute bourgeois. But so there's very little written about privacy as experienced or felt necessary by extremely vulnerable people who've been traumatized. And it's very interesting to see that all people living in some cities in the global south, there's remarkably little. So a smartphone. To someone like me, a smartphone is something irritating that steals all my information. But to a young girl in Mumbai who lives in a family in a small house with an large extended family, this may give her freedom to speak to friends, to get their mistakes on. So the fact that it steals all the data is neither here nor there. It gives you a sense of privacy. It enhances the privacy rather than reduces it. In terms of the question you asked about when do things become public, when do our public sayings become our own, this goes back to the first question you raised, I think, about the difference between active and passive views. And the idea that you should be the custodian or the curator of your own contribution to the public space is often made by people who think privacy should be an empowering thing and not simply something that happens to you. I mean, I've done some work in this space with developing things like personal data stores where you could curate your own personal data. So I attempted something like that. The problem, I think, and this is again goes back to the disconnect between the discussions we have as people studying this as an intellectual issue versus real world issues, is there just isn't very much evidence that anyone outside the sort of legal technical complex is very interested in curating their own stuff. The tools have been around for a long time with zero interest. Tim Berners-Lee is trying to enhance the web with a protocol called Solid that will enable people to store their own stuff. But again, I just think it's going to hit that brick wall of lack of interest. It's never going to reach the scale where it's going to function. So I am pessimistic about the possibilities of people taking control of their own data. It's not to say it can't happen at all, and it will be a legal matter. You have to change something about you have to change the stuff about the control data and personal data is your own stuff. You might even have to start thinking about what it means to own data at all, which is, as you know, a disputed concept, and most lawyers would say it's
To go back to the gentleman's question around AI.
Yeah, hallucination.
Yeah. The fact that like social media platforms like LinkedIn are now asking you to verify yourself means that burden of, who you are is coming into a wider domain. Are we now kind of at that tipping point where people are going to start thinking about, well, for all the profiles or, the IDs that I have out there, is there a way of consolidating that?
It may be. To be honest, I thought the research had been point, maybe 10 years ago, maybe more. It didn't. And I think it's a mixture of, no one's really invented the very good way of doing it. I certainly didn't. This is why I'm not a tech billionaire, is why I'm doing things like this for like 10 quid or desperate for anything. Free meal from Mark was just man from heaven as far as I was concerned. So I kind of got that very wrong when I was doing that. But, someone like, the Zuckerbergs and the Schmitz and things who know what they're doing might be able to produce tools that can do that. Berners-Lee is probably as good as anyone there is to try it. He's certainly the sort of greatest genius I know. So if he can, he might be able to answer. So there's the product issue, the usability of the product, but there's also the sort of salience for the person on the street. It's just not very salient. They kind of want them to buy tickets to concerts and they come without any problem and put them on a shirt that's what they want to happen. They want the world, they want the technology to enhance the world they have. And if behind the scenes there's a lot of data about them, they don't really care. Now, this is in a Western democracy. It would be very different in China. It would be a different Western even in India, I think, where a bit more authoritarian. Certainly a different Western Russia. But I couldn't change things in the West. I certainly can't change things in Russia.
I suppose in parts of Europe, you do have to have an ID in order to access any government or health-related service. We don't have that in the UK, and it seems like we're not going in that direction.
Well, we don't have it. The reason we don't have it in the UK is that we're a common country, and so there's a kind of assumption that you are in charge of your identity, and that you can present yourself or there's no canonical Napoleonic way of presenting yourself, whereas I lived for most of the year in the Netherlands, and it's just kind of assumed they think you're mad for worrying about how they identify. That's because the Dutch government is reasonably reliable. This will not be true in Beijing. So it's very difficult. And I think we kind of tend to think of technological issues as in our context of Western democracies. With China exporting technology to the global south through the Belt and Road Initiative and all that sort of stuff. Smart city technology, which it calls safe city technology, which is a lot to do with surveillance. It may be a different issue. So, yeah.